Thank you. It's my absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you to Wines of Chile, UPM Raffle-Attack, Vinventions, and all of the teams for so smoothly organising everything to enable me to be here and to focus primarily on the insights and information that I'm going to be sharing with you all today. So I know there was a little introduction to me before. Some of you I've had the pleasure of working with or meeting previously, or at least working with colleagues in your organisations. But I wanted to give you very briefly a little bit of background on me and therefore how and why I'm approaching this subject in the way that I am. As mentioned, I founded Wine Intelligence, which is now many years ago, which makes me now very old, as a result of which. And I sold Wine Intelligence to the IWSR group, or to private equity that owned the IWSR group just over 3 years ago. And we combined those two businesses. So now we're the global leader in market insight, market data, for volume and value for all beverage alcohol, and we cover at IWSR 160 markets globally. But we also have all of that consumer intelligence that we are known for at Wine Intelligence, which now spans wine, spirits, beers, RTDs, and low and no alc. So I now have the pleasure of sitting on the board as a director for the IWSR group. So I'm still really involved in the business, but from a strategic point of view, rather than an operational day-to-day point of view. I also have the immense pleasure of sitting on the board of the global board for WSET, which I'm really proud of. So obviously a huge fan of this idea of education in our industry. And I also currently am working as the interim CEO for the Gerard Basset Foundation, where we provide funding through grants and scholarships for individuals from underrepresented communities to develop long-lasting life education skills to enable them to have prosperous careers in wine, spirits, and hospitality. So I'm really proud, as Gerard was a great friend of mine. My other angle, and I said looking at you, some of you know me from this other angle, which is I've always carried on my academic career. So regionally, prior to Wine Intelligence, I was actually an academic in marketing, branding, and market research. I've carried that on and teach at a number of institutions around the world in marketing, in branding, in consumer insight, and in research. And I'm really passionate about that sort of lifelong learning and developing my own skills. I also work for a number of businesses around the world doing kind of consultancy and advisory work. So I was just recently in Portugal a few weeks ago with the Fladgate Partnership. And in a couple of weeks' time, I'm at what, quite frankly, is the most spectacular, I would say, drinks industry event in New Orleans, which is called Tales of the Cocktail, where they have over 5 days, around 50,000 bartenders from across the US coming into New Orleans for 5 days for master classes and things like that. So that's in the spirits area. And then finally, in my madness, my last part of this puzzle is that's me at my vineyard in the UK. That was definitely a big decision, and one 3 years later that we're still puzzling as to why we decided it was a good idea to plant our own vineyard, which we did. So I'm now the proud owner of a vineyard of Pinot Noir. We've just done shoot selection, bud rubbing, and we are currently battling with humidity and quite what to do about that as the season goes on, and how we need to adjust our spray plans, which of course increases cost that wasn't planned. So yes, so that's a little bit about me, and I wanted to share that really so you can kind of understand where I'm coming from and where my experience is coming from to enable us to sort of think about what the future might look like for wine. So we've got loads to get through because I always get overexcited and want to share lots and lots of information. So I'm going to try not to speak too quickly and just allow some processing as there's translating going on in your brains. But always ask, stick your hand up if you wanted to ask me a question or clarify. This is not meant to be too formal. So please, shout out if there's something that doesn't make sense or you have a question at any point. So we're going to look at one of my favorite topics to start with, which is all around market orientation. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. And I'm going to put a case to you, which is to succeed in wine, wine businesses will have to be market oriented to have success to 2030. So if you're not convinced at the start, I'm hoping by the end I might have at least demonstrated why I believe, from my experience, that that is the way to succeed. We're also going to look at global market trends and consumer demands. What are they? What should you be planning for in your organizations? And then finally, in session 3, we're going to be looking at how to develop effective products, but more importantly, effective brands, and how branding really works in the wine sector. So as I said, lots to get through, lots of information. There's a couple of, you've got a handout in front of you as well. We're going to do a couple of little quizzes as we go through to see what you think and how much you might know or might not know, and how your businesses are oriented. So that's the plan for this morning. So to kick off, session 1, why market orientation drives sustainable profit growth. And I'm going to talk to you about, we're going to think about how market orientation can work in wine businesses. But just before I go into that, I thought it would be really helpful for us to kind of ground ourselves in in the kind of key macro trends. So let's just get it out at the beginning, some of these key macro trends that we're all, I'm sure, really aware of. You'll be aware of them in your businesses. But just to kind of show the data, and maybe some of them might be slightly different. So the first one I want to put out there, despite what we might observe, what we might see, particularly in the trade or business press, wine will continue to be enjoyed and consumed. So let's start actually with a relatively positive message. We read a lot of trade press at the moment that, quite rightly, and we will get into that in a moment, is very doom and gloom. Nobody likes wine. Everybody's stopping drinking wine. Young people hate wine. Young people will never drink wine. We're doomed. The data and the evidence, which is what we will keep coming back to, does not support that. Wine will continue to be consumed. Now, what wine, where, and by whom is changing? And that's a lot of what we're going to focus on today. You'll see this data from IWSR that, yes, the global volume in terms of consumption of wine will decline. So that's the kind of bad news to the good news. it will reduce. The amount of wine consumed globally in the future will continue to reduce. Primarily, if you look, those amongst you looking at it who are good at quick doing maths will see that the value, so this is the global retail value of wine sold, actually is pretty stable. So the volume's going down, but the retail value is more or less forecast to be stable. So what's happening? Less wine at low price points. And that is one of the big messages. If your business relies on low-priced wine in the lower price segments, this is a big challenge for you. Because this is, if we look at these forecasts, you can see that differential. So it's the mid-premium, super premium, and luxury categories that, although we know are smaller in volume proportionally, will continue. And I'll go on to a lot more detail about why that is happening. So that's the first global trend. If we're looking at beverage alcohol, so here I'm looking not just at wine, but at spirits, beer, RTDs as well. And clearly in wine, we need to know what's happening, not just in wine, but in beverage alcohol and in non-alcohol. Because they're all drinks that consumers could choose or interchange with. The two growth markets in terms of value for beverage alcohol that will drive the most number of incremental dollars are India and the US. So that's primarily through beer and spirits rather than wine. But those are the markets where we will add the most amount of dollars in beverage alcohol between now and 2028. The other growth markets from a value point of view, so the number of dollars spent, are towards the markets such as Brazil, China, Mexico, South Africa, and to a certain extent, Spain. And again, this is for all beverage alcohol, not just for wine specifically. But we can see that those are the markets where we're going to see the most number of dollars added to this category. Second key trend is, and we were discussing this actually over dinner last night, which is this post-pandemic inventory overload. Gosh, there's lots of words in that sentence. Basically, overstocking, so retailers or importers not drawing down new orders and pushing through existing inventory from stock. Partly because there's a stock overload in many markets, as we know, and also partly because of the cost of money and higher inflation rates and interest rates. Retailers and their big buyers are trying to reduce their inventory and their costs. So you've got these two dynamics happening. So if we look at TBA, which is total beverage alcohol, we're forecasting at IWSR that this will be more or less flat globally for both volume and value this year. So we're not really going to see growth across total beverage alcohol, but we all are forecasting some recovery from 2025. In terms of wine, so these big macro trends, this data is from the OIV, and what we're seeing is that global wine production versus consumption is actually beginning to move towards equilibrium, where we have, for many years, been producing more wine globally than we have been consuming, particularly because of shorter harvests so reduced volume. We've seen some of the lowest volume production, as you can see in that chart, the line at the top, some overall globally. A lot of that to do with weather and climatic impacts on vineyards, which we've seen globally. And then consumption overall has been coming down, as I alluded to earlier, but we're seeing more getting to that equilibrium point. However, if we look at it in more detail, so this data is from IWSR. I'm just going to explain what's quite a busy chart. So in the pale blue, you're seeing the percentage change. So here we've got it for wine. So this is the volume percentage change from 2022 to 23. So overall volume of wine declined. And then here is the forecast out to 2028. So it's what I was pointing to earlier, that overall globally we're seeing a reduction in the total global volume of wine consumed. In terms of value, actually wine is just at negative, as in negative growth. And if we compare that, for example, to beer, where we've seen the volume has been down in beer globally year on year, but forecast to rise a little bit. But the value of beer, which is all we know is a really big category proportionally, is increasing as beer premiumizes. And then if we look at spirits over there, we'll see that both we've got volume, some volume growth, but primarily in spirits is coming from value, and again the same in RTDs. Remember though, RTDs and cider globally are very small proportionally categories, so those growth rates are big but from a very little base. So that's the kind of core difference there. So all of this is leading us to continued premiumization in wine. So I've showed you lots of different data and ways of looking at the market and the forecasts, and again from the OIV. Now some of this, so this is that we're at some of the highest euros per litre on average price paid for wine that we have seen or the OIV have ever recorded. So the price points are higher now for wine than ever recorded previously by OIV, and increased nearly 30% since 2020. Now, a lot of that is to do with inflation. So it's not necessarily that consumers are saying, although they are, I'll come on to it, oh, I want to spend much more money per bottle or per glass. A lot of that is just the increase in costs, which have driven the prices up. So the price paid has gone up because of increase in cost. So there is consumer demand for more premium, but we've also seen input cost rises. So it's a combination of the two. We had been seeing, particularly in sort of 22, 23, post the immediate impacts of COVID, a lot of premiumization, actually during COVID as well, or in terms of beverage alcohol. But if we look at the different price bands, so starting at the lowest price points up to the sort of super premium and luxury price points, and we're looking at wine, so we're looking here, it's the volume change and the volume forecast in the mid-price points, and then in the premium, and then the super premium. You'll see, and I mentioned it at the beginning, that the only forecast growth is coming in those premium price points. And we're seeing ongoing forecast reduction in the value and below and standard price points. So I said at the beginning, if you remember, if your business is reliant on wines in this category and this category, overall, globally, the volume of wine sold in those two categories will continue to decline. Fact. Might not want to hear it, might not be good news, but better to be armed, I believe, with the facts than to make business decisions. You know, that is a fact. It will happen. Now, our forecast numbers at IWSR might be slightly out. You know, forecasts are forecasts. They're hard to do, but it's not just IWSR. If you look at all other data sources, they're all basically saying the same thing. I've just showed you IWSR because I'm biased, but I could show you lots of other data sources that are pointing to the same. So either, as wine businesses, either we can accept that this is going to happen and plan for it now, or we can ignore this and carry on doing what we're doing and hope it's going to get better. Your choice. The good news is there are things you can do. So by the end of the session, hopefully I'll have armed you with some toolkits and some things that you can do. So that's really tough if you're in those sectors. What are you going to do about it? Because if you think of all the other producers around the world, they're also facing this. You know, producers in France are dealing with this. Producers in Italy, producers everywhere are dealing with the same thing. There are opportunities, and I'm just showing you an example, again, from IWSR data. So here we're looking from the volume growth, so it's whether it's gone up or down, in red, white, and rosé, the three categories. So there's that volume, slow volume decline that I was talking about, primarily at the lower price points. However, you'll see that dark pink line going, woo! That's like, whew, good news in amongst this. What is that? Premium rosé. So again, this is a growth, so it's from a small base, that premium rosé. It's not like lots of volume. But from that base, that is where, and I could show you a similar slide for sparkling wine over the last 5 years, not a dissimilar pattern. So it's about identifying where the opportunities are so that your businesses are ahead rather than behind curves like that. We at IWSR and Wine Intelligence were talking about this premium rosé trend before 2019. So you could see it in the data before then. It was very clear. So by using data and information, you can literally, if you'll excuse the pun here, be ahead of the curve. And if we know what the dynamics of the market are, being ahead of the curve becomes even more important. The fifth kind of global trend, and one that, again, we're going to touch on quite a lot today, is around continued moderation of alcohol consumption. So globally, across kind of core markets for beverage, where alcohol is consumed, around a quarter, 23% of adults of legal drinking age abstain totally from alcohol. And if you look at those percentages, they're more varied between markets. And you'll see, for example, the US being one of the markets with a higher proportion of adults who do not drink alcohol. That's been the case in America, very similar number for at least 20, 30 years. So very, very similar numbers. We know that we have a higher proportion of consumers, and I'm going to come on to a lot more detail on this in a moment, moderating the total amount of alcohol they consume or abstaining completely from alcohol consumption. So we've got a lot of impacts happening there. And why is this happening? Well, we are now seeing, again, in IWSR data, a very clear change in lifestyle behavior. What we had seen through COVID, we were wondering, is this just kind of COVID impact on our behavior? But what seems to be happening is that is normalizing actually to a change in behavior now. So this moderation, part of it is coming from, at the moment, what we call economic moderation. So people actively choosing not to spend money on alcohol under economic constraints. Around 20% of it we can attribute to health moderation, so direct health impacts. And then around 50% is more sort of generic well-being or change in sort of socializing habits. And those are the key reasons why consumers are moderating. So if we look over on the other side, you can see there are fewer, and again, I'll come on to more detail in a moment, fewer drinking and social occasions. So we're reducing the number of alcohol-related social occasions that we are participating in. And when we are participating in them, we're drinking less at those occasions. So we're drinking a lower frequency, lower intensity, and lower volume. So, for example, again, when we do lots of research with consumers, we hear and observe and we see in the data that what consumers are doing is kind of switching and blending, not wine blending, blending of categories. So, for example, if you're going to a social occasion, you might start the evening off with a zero alcohol beer. And then you might have a full-strength beer, and then you might have a wine, and then you might finish off on a zero alcohol beer or a Coke. So that idea that we're actually much, much more conscious globally of our consumption of alcohol and just changing our behavior patterns to fit with that. So majority of people are not abstaining 100% from alcohol, as you saw earlier, although that is increasing a little bit. Most of us are saying, okay, it's Monday to Thursday, I don't drink. I only drink on the weekends. Or if I am going out, I'm going to have 2 glasses of wine, not 3. So it's that sort of a consciousness. And again, we saw in the wine intelligence consumer data from 10 years ago, consumers saying that they are more aware of ABV levels in alcohol and prioritizing or thinking about that more. So we saw that starting at least 10 years ago. And if you think of the pressure, the political messages, the World Health Organization, the health lobbies, increasingly focusing on alcohol consumption as part of the health lobby message. So again, as human beings, we're just hearing more conscious of this than we had been previously. So those are all the kind of big macro trends. So good news and bad news, challenges. We can choose to ignore it and hope that somehow our businesses will ride the storm, or we can make changes into how we do that. So if we just switch gear a moment, I just want to lead into this idea of market orientation that I think, based on the evidence I'm seeing, kind of is the key to future success in wine businesses. So if you'll forgive me, putting a slide like this, which I know we all know, but really just to contextualize, what is the purpose of your businesses? If I asked you that question, and when I do ask businesses, because I've done research on this, basically it's 4 things: to create long-term value, to provide employment, to contribute to society and/or community, and to generate profit. And typically, those are the 4 core purposes of our organizations. And depending on what business you work in, you know, some of those might be more or less important in your organizations. However, the reason I put to generate profit right in the middle and in red is that, as we all know, if our businesses or organizations are not generating profit, we cannot create long-term value, we cannot provide employment, and we cannot contribute to society and the community. So all of those other ambitions, which are, again, I guess for many of us as human beings, really important, kind of come back to this central one, is we've got to make profit, because we can't do anything else if we're not generating profit, or at least, you know, breaking even to enable us to do that. So, if you agree with me that generating profit is the core to business success, which is what we're thinking about today to 2030, then how do we generate profit in wine businesses? So I'm letting you think about that, and we're going to do our first quiz, because you've heard a lot of me talking. So, you've got in front of you your little quiz sheets. I'm not going to ask you to hand them in and mark them. These are for you only. But what do you think? See that question? What is the most important function in your business to drive profit to 2030? Now, I'm being really mean because I'm a researcher. I have deliberately not given you a Likert 1 to 5 scale where you could just put 5 for everything, because that's cheating. So I've done what we call ranking scale rather than rating scale, which means you have to do them 1 to 7. So I'm forcing you to force yourself by giving you a ranking scale rather than a rating scale. Because otherwise, I know what you would all do, which is you'd all just put 5 out for everything. Everything's really important. So I'm not allowing you, I'm being mean. So I'm going to give you 1 or 2 minutes, 1 to 7, which are what is going to have the most impact, thinking about your wine business or organization, on driving success or profit to 2030. Is it sales, finance, in the case of wine, viticulture, winemaking, marketing, HR, procurement? Have a go. Okay, are we done? I think most people done. Just that first page only for now. Okay, I'm not going to do a show of hands at this point. Well, maybe we will. I know how we can do it. Okay, who, for the ranking, 1 to 7, and I really need you to put your hands up here. Don't just kind of pretend that you haven't answered it. How many people put sales as ranked number 1? Okay, so that, I think, is going to be the majority answer by the look of it. Yeah, okay. Well, it seems to be there's something going on this side of the room, because there's a lot more yeses here. Is it like different functions in your roles? Maybe that's all the commercial people over there. Finance. Okay, maybe they're the finance people. Viticulture. Oh, we've got some, whoever is very determined, the viticulture fans or voters there. Winemaking. Okay, so that's probably second so far. Marketing. Oh, okay. So that's definitely up there with, what was the sales? Possibly more. HR. 1, 2. Okay. I'm gonna support those people who've put their HR hands up in a moment. We're going to come on to why that's really important. One of my 3 recommendations, actually. So I'm with those people who say HR. Procurement. Oh, poor people in procurement. We have one. No, yes, no, possibly. He's not sure. Okay, so as we move through, I'm going to come back to that at the end and see whether anybody's had a change of opinion or not. Looks like the 2 leading ones are sales and marketing, with wine making being third. Now, that might just be because of who we've got in the room, and the majority of you are from marketing and commercial functions. And if we had all the winemakers and viticulturalists in the room, we would have a very different, and if we had a conference for people in HR, then that would look very different. So slightly unfair in terms of, in a good research, what we would say a bias sample. But I put that question up there actually in seriousness, which is, if our purpose is to create profit so that our businesses are sustainable, as in financially sustainable, and can do those things we were talking about here, what do our businesses most need to do to get to that profit? I would suggest that our number 1 purpose is to solve problems and meet the needs of customers and consumers through our products and services. If we meet the needs of our customers and our consumers, they will buy our stuff. So meeting the needs means understanding what they value, not telling them what we value. And in wine, all of us can probably put our hands up and say, historically, in wine, we have been telling customers and consumers what they should want and value, because we've decided. What we have not historically been good at is saying, what do our customers and our consumers really value? Not what we think, what do they think? Because if you can match their needs and wants with what you're producing, at least you've got a shot of selling it. If you're producing this because you like this, you think this is good, but your consumer is valuing something that's over there, and there's no connection between the two, we haven't got a hope of selling it, because they don't value it. So we only buy stuff that meets a need or we value. We're not going to buy it out of the goodness of our hearts just because we think, oh, that's a really nice business, I'll buy the stuff even though I don't want it. Particularly in tough economic conditions where we're really considering what we're spending. So clearly I'm biased because I come from a research and a marketing and a strategy side of the business. But to me, this is just plain logic. If we don't know what somebody values, how can we make stuff that they're going to potentially buy? So it's the push versus the pull. So you can see where I'm going. We have another quiz, so I'm going to give you a little bit longer on this one. Thinking about your business or organization, and now you have got a 1 to 5 scale. I've let you have one this time. thinking about these, so the grammatically the statements don't quite work because I've used it from a lot of academic research, but I think you'll get the idea, which is it's either never or not important, always or very important. We don't have to worry too much because I've taken these items from lots of different scales in academic studies that look at business orientation. So I've kind of gone through all of those and pulled together a sort of mini version for us to use today. So these all come from kind of proper academic studies, and I've combined them for us. So I'll just read them out. As you're thinking about it, you can kind of mark on the 1 to 5. Think of your business. Even if you're a supplier to the wine sector, you can still think about these or do an equivalent, which is if we educate our consumers, they'll buy more of our product. So be really honest in your business. Is that something that's never said or always said? Never done or always done? If we educate them more, they'll buy our stuff. What's the culture in your wine business? The second one, our winemaking team decides which products to produce. Is that never or always? The next one, our sales team or commercial team set our prices. Never or always? Or somewhere in between? Our marketing team primarily supports the sales team. To hear what I'm getting at is the function of marketing is a support role to commercial and sales. Is that never in your business or always in your business? Our business decisions are led by market information. Now be honest. We want honesty here. This is private. You don't have to show this to anyone. Think about it. How many of your business decisions are led by market information? And along with that, we systematically and continuously monitor market trends. Never or always? We invest in understanding the needs of our target market. Do you really do that? If yes, 5. If not really, somewhere closer to 1. We meet regularly with people from across the organization to review market opportunities and risks. So by that I mean, for example, the winemaking viticulturalist team, the sales team, the marketing team, the HR, the leadership, the operations, are you all communicating, or are you having the opportunity to understand and review market opportunities and risks? We have good communication between departments regarding market information. How true is that in your business? Customer feedback is systematically collected and used to improve our products and service. Does your company have systematic feedback from your customers, so your trade customers, and measure and monitor and track that year on year, every 3 years, every 3 months, doesn't matter what the time frame is, but do you do that? We systematically collect information about our competition. Now that's great, seeing as we're all in the room together. Do you systematically collect information about your competition? So, having thought through those, again, I'm going to come on to it in a moment and we'll look at some of the answers. Typically in businesses, there are different business models, but typically the kind of core three, and particularly the main three that we see in wine, are product-oriented, sales-oriented, or market-oriented. And by this, we're talking about what I mean by business orientation is kind of the culture and the strategy and the focus of how the business behaves. So it's really digging into, and there are great ways that we've just done. I've just done a really quick sample with you about how you can measure this. There are some more sophisticated ways we can measure it, and we come into businesses, or I go into businesses specifically to do this, which is to really look at what type of strategic culture does an organization have, and where the opportunities may or may not be based on that strategic, what we call orientation. We could call it business culture or business strategic culture. But typically, we have these three in wine. From the research I do, these are the three main ones that we have. So we have product-oriented wine businesses. So if the answer to questions, those questions is typically yes, that means that culturally you are a product-oriented business, organization. So if you say, if you hear these comments, if this is what is the culture in your business, our primary focus is on the wines we make. We know our wines are fantastic. We don't need consumer feedback. Marketing is there to get our customers to love our great wines. The product is king. So if those are the kind of sentiments in your organization, then typically that means you are a product-oriented strategic organization. Most wine businesses fall into this category, just globally. And that's, we all know, we don't need to go into why, because of the history, the culture, the tradition. Now I understand a little bit about growing grapes and the production cycle, and et cetera, et cetera. We know why. We know why this is, and we know why it's really difficult to produce the product in our category because of that year-on-year variation and the length of time it takes for maturity. So we all know that. The result of which is that we have ended up, typically, as a category in this area, which serves us really well in a growing volume and value market. However, we are now entering an era where volume will decline, value will hold because of premiumization. So this strategy, which most wine businesses globally have, therefore becomes really challenging and risky, I would say. Second type of business orientation we see in wine, typically, if these are the conversations or this is the culture, we care more about sales. We don't need customer feedback. The more wines we have, the better. So this is like, let's just keep increasing our portfolio and make more SKUs to satisfy each and every retailer around the world. There's probably some nods going on in the room on that strategy. Oh, well, if, Sainsbury's want, if we had an individual, Walmart say, Costco want, oh, we'll just make another SKU for them, because that will solve our sales problem. Marketing is only there to support sales activities, and revenue is king. So if the answers to those are typically yes in your business, then that means your business typically is going to be more sales-oriented. You'll not be surprised, given how I've set this up, that I am suggesting that to have success to 2030, wine businesses need to become market-oriented, because those two previous ones work in a growing category. They do not work in a declining category, one could say. So to be market-oriented, we make wines that our consumers want. The wine consumer is king. Our supply chain partners are a key source of insight. Market understanding is very important. Competitor analysis is vital. We test our wines with customers before we go to market. How many people have done that? And I'm going to come on to what you'll probably quite rightly push back at me and say, but we don't have the money to do that. There are some ways we can kind of work around that a little bit. Now, two of the most successful companies in beverages, beverage alcohol, specifically Diageo, Coca-Cola, non-alcoholic, but increasingly alcohol with their growing RTD portfolios. Both of those businesses are not successful just by coincidence. Those organizations are 100% market-oriented in their strategy and their approach. Now, we can say, is this chicken or egg? You know, which came first? And you could say, oh, but it's all right for them. They're big global companies. They've got huge budgets. They didn't get there. They didn't start like that. They grew to be that because they were market-oriented. So I would really push back at wine businesses that say we can't afford to be market-oriented. I would say you can't afford not to be market-oriented. And there are ways that you can do it, and there are successful ways of doing that. So, how did you get on with answering your quiz? So, if you put a 5 on, or a sort of high end on those first two statements, that means your business is more of a product, or has strong product orientation. If you put a high score on the next two, that means that your company, your organization, has strong sales orientation. If you put a high score on any of the others, those are all features of strong market orientation. Now, you've probably got a combination. I'm sort of making it sound a bit simplistic. Most businesses have some market orientation, some sales orientation, and some product orientation. What we're trying to get to here is this level between them and what dominates in your market. So, if you've got really low scores on any of these, I would recommend that that is something that you have a look at, or you talk about, you think about in your businesses or your organizations. Why are we low on these? And should we be prioritizing this at a top leadership level within our organization? And if you need me to persuade any boards of directors or top leadership teams as to why this is important, I've got some good ammunition to go to boards and leadership teams on why they should listen to this. All to do with the finances, which is always, as we know, what will encourage leaders to make change. So this is, so that's, I think it's really interesting. I've just given you a sort of snapshot of how we measure business orientation to give you an idea of ways of challenging and being really honest with yourself in your businesses, with you and the roles you do and with your colleagues. So what are the barriers? Why don't we do more of it then? Market orientation is a really good idea. Diageo are like the most super successful and continue to be, as are Coca-Cola, who do nothing but put marketing and consumers right in the center of their businesses. Why are we not doing it in wine? Kind of makes sense. The logic is there, isn't it? The finances are there, so why are we not doing it? Well, yes. Yes, long-term. So there was a good comment there, which is about long-term and short-term. Yeah, because there's always that focus on we've got to make our numbers this year, rather than how do we make our numbers in 5 years. But if you keep on that cycle of we've got to make the numbers this year, we've got to, as we know, then it just, it just is self-fulfilling. So one of the things will be always, well, research is too expensive. We haven't got the budget for that. Okay, then carry on making products people don't want. That's fine. What's going to cost your business more? Products that consumers don't want, that you then have to discount, or products that they do want because you've invested in it? Don't have enough time to do research. We've got to sell it. Again, same issue. This is a classic. Well, our opinion is best because we've got professional experience. We know what consumers want. We know what the market wants. Been doing this for 20 years, 30 years, 10 years. Or consumers don't know what they want. Why should we ask them? They don't know what they want. We need to tell them what they want. We make great wine. That's what matters most. So we don't need to research it because we make really good wine. Look, we got some points in some competitions. So we're fine. Marketing, well, that's all marketing does is PR and events, isn't it? That's what marketing is, PR and events. Not that I'm dissing PR or events, by the way, because I think they're hugely valuable in any organization, by the way, and in any business I work in, they are a priority. But they are not the only part of marketing in my mind. They are a hugely valuable part of marketing. So, if those are the barriers, maybe those are some of the statements you've said, you've heard in your businesses. To succeed to 2030, we need to create change. If our businesses are not fully market-oriented, are not aware of those trends that are happening, those macro trends I talked about at the beginning. If you are not aware of that, your business, it's really tough, will not thrive to 2030. We have the evidence that supports that. So the lovely Robert Joseph, again, a very good friend of mine, said recently, wineries need to take wine out of its self-imposed ghetto. This idea of kind of keeping ourselves in this sort of narrow focus. And another commentator said, the wine industry can be slow to embrace change, being steeped in tradition. Finding solutions often means making bold changes, which can be risky for any business. Most wine businesses have a low risk threshold. Again, not surprisingly, the amount of money, time, and effort we have to invest into our vineyards. So it's not surprising that we're risk averse because we're carrying an expensive asset and high operational costs. So again, not surprising, but I would challenge us to say that if we don't change, we're at an inflection point right now. where the wine consumption patterns are and will change. So we have that opportunity now to position our businesses for that change, or just keep our fingers crossed and hope. So do we really understand then the needs of our consumers? What are the needs in wine? What problems or needs is wine solving? It can be a treat. Oh, I'm getting together with my friend and, we haven't caught up for ages. It can be a reward. I've had a rubbish day at work. I sat in a boring conference all morning. I need a reward. It can be a knowledge builder. So this is, if those of you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this is this kind of self-actualization. It's really important to us when our other needs are met. So this is about kind of feeling better about ourselves because we're sort of improving our knowledge base and our learning and, where the connecting with the product. So that might be. It might be about status. Look at me. I can buy this. I know about this. It might be a memory marker. It's a wedding, it's a birthday, it's a business day, whatever it is. It might be solving that need. It might be a social signifier. I'm connecting with others through wine. Or it might just be about refreshment. It's quite like a drink. So there's all these different what we call need states that can be solved through wine. But all too often in wine, we're talking about knowledge builder, a lot of that, which is important, and we're also talking about taste profile. We're less often thinking in our targeting, our communications, how we brand our products, about all those other types of needs that we might be solving. So if any other slide you don't remember or statement that I say today you ignore, I would really plead with you that don't ignore this one. I think this is the most important element that constrains wine. All of us, myself included, are not our consumers. And we never will be. We cannot be a regular wine drinker because we know too much, we work in the sector, we have knowledge, we have experience. We are not typical, we're abnormal wine consumers, all of us, because it's our job. We're paid to work in this industry, we're paid to have knowledge, we're paid to know stuff. It's our job. So we are not reflective of real wine consumers. So us saying, well, I'm motivated by this or I like this, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We are not the majority of most of our consumers, and we never will be, because we have this knowledge and experience and connection and involvement because it's our profession. So our world is all about this. Tasting, evaluation, product development, all of those things. In the real world, where real people live, when it comes to wine, you might be sitting, on your phone watching telly on the floor drinking a glass of wine. Or, God forbid, in that middle picture at the beach, drinking it out of a plastic glass. Can you imagine? How horrendous that is, that somebody dares to drink our product out of a plastic glass on a beach. They should be sitting at a table, sniffing and swirling, because that's what wine is. Or, God forbid, you're at a festival, music festival, sitting on a rug, and there's two of you, and you're both drinking out of the bottle, and different bottles. We don't drink out of bottles, we drink out of nice glasses because we sniff and we swirl. So that's the difference in terms of the reality, that is how our product is often consumed. Now, some people are going to enjoy tasting, and of course they are, but it's only a small percentage. The majority, it's just a drink. It's not that important to most people. They're not going to invest masses of energy, masses of time, masses of education. They just want a drink that they like, that they can find, that they can buy, that they can pour, that they can share, that they can reward themselves, that they can treat themselves. And that is the majority of consumers globally. If we look at the data, in most markets, it's around 10 to 12% of wine drinkers within the wine drinker population who are more higher involved, to the point that they want to gain knowledge or really invest in that kind of proper knowledge end, more similar, I'm imagining, to most of us. That leaves about 90% of consumers globally who are not like that. So what can you do then as a result of what I've been talking about so far? What actions could you take back to your businesses today, tomorrow? Not surprised that I'm going to say prioritize and invest in true consumer understanding. Now, you're going to say to me, I haven't got the money because it's really difficult out there, which it is. However, primary research is the one that costs lots of money. Now, clearly as a primary researcher and somebody who used to run a business doing primary research and sits on the board of a business that does primary research, I still think this is really important. Of course I'm going to say that. However, that comes with a price tag. But if it means that you can sell your product for $1 more a case, $5 more a case, you're going to get twice as many sales, etc. 50% reduction on promotion price. That value equation starts to add up pretty quickly when you do primary research. So primary research is the research that specifically you commission and is about your business. So it might be focus groups or interviews or surveys. It has a specific purpose in mind and is commissioned to do that. Obviously, that's the most expensive type of research you can do, but has all those values. Secondary research is the stuff where a study is completed and multiple users use the evidence. So if we think about what I showed you from the OIV in those slides earlier, that's produced by somebody else and lots of us have access to it. So with the exception of 2 or 3 of the IWSR slides I've shown you today, everything else I've shown you is secondary research that any of you could have got hold of. So I'm not got magic access, well I do slightly have magic access to IWSR data, but even we at IWSR give out that top line data because we want to share it with our communities, as do all the other research companies and agencies and consultants. So actually you could pretty much have written that presentation first part that I've written today yourselves based on doing secondary research. And then one of my favorite types is observational research. So here I encourage you all, are you doing things like, how often, it's going to sound really weird now I say it, do you go into a pub or into a bar and sit there and watch people? Okay, you have to be quite careful when you're doing it, but in all seriousness, simply go to a bar that you don't normally go to. Go to a bar that doesn't have people that look like you in it. Because we live in the bubbles of people like us and people that are similar to us. We naturally do. Go somewhere that is not for your age group or not targeted at you. What are people drinking? How are people behaving? What are they doing? Just looking at what they're ordering. Huge amount of information. How recently have you been into wine stores or into supermarkets and actually looked at how are people browsing the shelves? Are they going straight for something they can recognize? They kind of obviously got it in their mind. Or are they browsing up and down? Are they picking up the bottles? What are they reading? Are they looking at price points? What things seem to, again, you can see just by observing human beings. And then imagine a world where you then said to your importers or distributors in other countries, do you want to participate in this kind of internal study we're doing? Why don't you get your agents or your importers to go and do the same in their markets? Whenever you're traveling for business, are you doing this when you're there? Are you going to restaurants? Are you going to retailers and actually properly observing how consumers are behaving and what they're doing? Imagine how much information you could get if 5 of you in your business went off and did this. Each of you went to a bar you've never been before. Each of you went to a restaurant you'd never been to before. Each of you went to a retail store you'd never been to before. And you shared what you observed and what you saw with those 5 people. Imagine how much you'd learn. So I would say that, yes, primary research is expensive, but it can also save very expensive mistakes. Secondary research, so much information out there. It's about being systematic in terms of actually dedicating time to collect it and sharing it in the business. And then observational research you can do tomorrow. You can involve your colleagues. You can get together a group of friends. Say, I don't know, you're in a sports club or a sports team or something like that. Say to some of your friends, or a book club, or, I'll pay for some pizzas, come round to the house, or I'll meet you at a restaurant, and just talk to me about wine. Talk to me about what you think. Talk to me about what you choose. Talk to me about why you choose it. It's not structured research, but you're going to get so much information from doing that. And it would be great if these were people from slightly different social circles, different ages, not, in your immediate circle. But think about that. It costs you, a few dollars, a few tens of dollars to host that evening. How much information are you going to get? So that's the first action you can take. The second one, and again, not surprising, I am going to say to you, I'm going to challenge you to say in your businesses, is marketing at the heart of your organization? In a market-oriented organization, marketing sits in the middle. Doesn't make all the decisions, clearly. But what it does is the marketing function coordinates with viticulture, sales, procurement, HR, everybody else, to ensure that everybody across the business is understanding consumer and customer needs and wants. Making sure that everybody has got that information and is also feeding back in from what they're hearing. What are the viticulturalists learning? What are the winemakers doing? What's happening in finance? What's happening in sales? What's happening? So marketing should be the coordinator of information coming in and out to enable all of the teams to be on one page or focused in the same direction from marketing-oriented process. And then we talked about we had like the lonely hand for 2 lonely hands for HR, and I said, I'm going to support you on the HR bit, which is prioritize, and this again is to business leaders, leadership teams, and boards. Prioritize investment in strategic marketing skills. Strategic marketing is a discipline in the same way that winemaking, viticulture, or accounting is a discipline. It's not something we do by just showing up and going, oh, I think I'll do marketing today. It is a disciplined career and way of approach. It's not simply, I think I'd like to do marketing. It's like me turning up going, do you know what, I think I'll do the finances from now on. And that would, clearly I understand how finance works, but I am not the right person because I haven't been trained in it. So are you investing in strategic marketing skills and training in your organizations? Because without those, this idea of the two I showed you previously, so particularly this, won't work. I wonder in your organizations, depending on how you're structured, whether you have a leadership team or a board of directors, or it depends on the structure, but where is marketing in that structure? Is the leadership team finance, ops, winemaking, sales, viticulture, possibly without marketing there? One to challenge on. So now we're going to switch gear, well, build on what we've done. So if I am saying to you we should have lots of consumer insight and really know what's going on in our businesses, what I thought I'd do in this part is share some of those consumer insights with you so that you can see in more detail some of the consumer trends as opposed to the macro trends, which is what I showed you at the beginning. So we're going to whiz through some of these consumer trends and see where we get to in them. And I realize I've got it says 2023 there. I'm very dyslexic with numbers, so I realize that sometimes I get them round the wrong way. So you know where we're going with that, to 2030. I'll make sure it gets changed. So I'm going to look at 4 key areas of consumer trends. We're going to look at demographics, society, consumption, and taste. And I'm going to go through each of these. I am using, and now we all know the terms, secondary data, a little bit of IWSR primary data, but mainly secondary data to do this. So again, stuff you could all do, from spending a lot of time with Google and ChatGPT and various other things to enable you to get here. So I'm going to spend, don't panic about timing, because I'm going to spend a little bit longer on demographics. And you'll be thinking, gosh, she's talking for a long time, the clock is ticking, and she's got another 7 trends to get through. So don't panic. And the reason I want to spend a bit more time on demographics is I want to illustrate a bit more with data to show you what's going on in wine demographically. The others will move through slightly more quickly. So let's start then. Let's roll through these 8 trends. So we have an aging, active population. Globally, we are aging in most countries. And our population demographics are really shifting. This is of our whole population, not just TBA or wine drinkers. But it is mirrored in that. So if you look on the left, certainly when I was at school, because I'm quite old now, we always talked about population pyramids. Yeah, so you have lots of people at the bottom and fewer people when you get old, because then we die off, so you have fewer people up there. So if you look at, this is from the US Census Bureau, those 2 diagrams there. That's what the population of the US looked like in 1960. 100 years on, projections to 2060, and we're pretty good at demographic forecasting because we know how many people are born and typical lifespans. You'll see that is now a rectangle, not a triangle or a pyramid. It's massively changed our demographics and what we look like in terms of age of people around the world. I saw a statistic just popped up on my LinkedIn yesterday from a study that BlackRock had done. And I want to say they said 1 in 6 people around the world is now aged, or will be soon to be, aged over 65. 1 in 6 people around the world now aged over 65. So it's really, really changed. We have declining birth rates in many countries, countered by increased health and longevity. So the two things kind of balance each other out. So it's not just in the US. I've shown you the US census data, but the same thing, for example, is happening in the UK. In the mid-2020s, for example, in the UK, we had 1.7 million people aged 85 plus. That is going to double by 2045 of 85 plus year olds. So obviously, this is is having a huge impact on our economies, on our productivity, on our demand for health services and things like that as we're aging. So if we take at the bottom there, I just did an illustration for you, 34% of US adults are currently age 65 plus. By 2053, that will be nearly half of the US adult population age 65 plus. So just rewind that. By 2053, almost half, 46%, of the US population, of the US adult population, will be age 65 plus. So it's really, really changing. And we hear a lot, particularly about wine, about, oh, young people, younger people, clearly of legal drinking age, don't drink wine, what are we going to do? What's the future going to look like? So if we look at it from look at this idea of aging wine drinkers and aging populations. That first column here is the percentage of people who in 2010 were in that age group who drank wine. Okay, so if we take the youngest, people in 2010 in the US, actually that's age 21 to 24, sorry, for US, who were regular wine drinkers, was 36% of those young, new into legal drinking age, consumed wine. And you can go down and see through all the different age groups, actually it's pretty consistent across age groups in the US. One thing has changed significantly. The proportion of younger people in the US now drinking wine. So if we wind the clock forward 14 years to 2024, and we look at people who are in that age group today, what proportion of them are drinking wine? So yes, in the US, the proportion of younger people drinking wine has reduced. And we can see that that's moved, however, from around 5 million to 4.3 million. Partly, now we're going to get into a whole demographic lecture now, partly because there's been, as well as the aging, we've had the influx of younger generations coming into the US. But you'll see in other age groups, actually, the proportion of people drinking wine in the US has gone up. So you can see it's gone up in 45 to 54-year-olds. More today, 45 to 54-year-olds are drinking wine proportionally than were nearly 15 years ago in the US. That's what that means. So I'm imagining you're saying, how can that work if the volume's going down? Got more people drinking and yet the volume's going down. Well, that's all about reduced frequency of occasion and reduced frequency within occasion. So people in America have not fallen out of love with wine. Lots of people, in fact, more are drinking wine. They're just drinking it less often and less frequently and with less intensity. So wine is not being rejected, it's just being consumed more selectively. And if we look at that bottom one, yes, the proportion of older consumers, so 65 plus in the US who are drinking wine has gone up a little bit. But look at that bottom number. It's gone up from 12.9 million older, 65 plus drinkers in the US nearly 15 years ago. That's now 21 million. Why? Because the proportion of people in that age group has increased. So we've got over 20 million regular wine drinkers in the US who are aged over 65 plus today. However, I do want to just show you something else. I don't want to get too technical on the data, but bear with me. That first column is in the US, is the proportion by age of regular wine drinkers. However, what you'll see, if we look at how much share of volume by age group, and then share of value by age group for wine, this is, what you'll see is that the older age groups, those proportions are going down. So what that means is that although 36% of regular wine drinkers are aged 55 plus, boomers and seniors, actually they account for 27% of the volume of wine in the US and 21% of the value. Why is that? Because as we get older, typically we spend less on wine and we drink a little bit less frequently. And a lot of that is to do with we kind of learn what we like. We're not doing the social signaling as much. We're not buying in the on-premise, really important, as frequently, where the actual price point, dollar price point, is higher, obviously, in the on-premise than it is in retail. And this covers on and off-premise. So and we tend to know what we like and we're happy to stick to it when we get older. So there is, and that pattern is really consistent across most markets. So you see that sort of slight change in the volume and value amongst older drinkers. If we look at the UK, we can actually see declining proportion of wine drinkers in those younger age groups, or actually up to the mid-age groups, increasing with our older again. So in the UK, we've gone from just under 6 million 65 plus wine drinkers to 8.5 million, because the percentage has gone up and the population has gone up. In the other age groups, and most significantly the youngest age group in the UK, has, yes, declined. So we have seen fewer, proportionally, younger drinkers coming into wine. So I said at the beginning there was lots of news about younger consumers rejecting wine. Fewer of them are drinking wine. They are still drinking wine, but they're drinking more of other stuff and they're drinking less alcohol. So wine is not completely out. It's just that there are other habits going on. If we look to Japan, so let's look at a completely different market now, and we look at the same thing. Actually, our younger drinkers in Japan, proportionally, there are more of them. However, in our older drinkers, proportionally, there are fewer, but again, we have a significantly aging population in Japan. So those numbers, even though it's dropped significantly, the millions of drinkers has not dropped quite so much. So why am I showing you lots of details on demographics? And you're probably saying, why is she showing us all this data? It's really to illustrate this point that, on the one hand, yes, in some markets, a smaller proportion of younger people are drinking wine. Although, if we look at data, particularly UK, US, more mature markets, actually what we're seeing is as people are aging, their more of them are embracing wine. So actually, it's a kind of life stage thing that is happening. So what we're anticipating is that, yes, proportionally, there are fewer, if I go back to a market where it's the case, fewer younger drinkers entering the market. But what we are seeing signs of is that as they get older, actually, more of them are beginning to adopt wine, as we have done in previous generations. So it'll be less, but it won't be completely dropped out. But if you are doing promotions, advertising, those that invest in any type of comms or advertising, whether it be digital, social media, whatever type of communications, in-store, out of store, with your trade customers, how many of you have put a pitch to or asked your media agency, or if you're in the marketing department, to say, do you know what? Let's target the over 60s. Let's target the over 50s. What are they watching? What are they listening to? What are they reading? What motivates them? Or are you, in your businesses, pretty much like every other wine business in the world, saying, let's focus on Gen Z and see how we can engage them with wine? There is plenty of opportunity. Now, price points are more tricky with older consumers, yes, but that's on average. But how often are your media, your comms strategies actually taking into account where the growth opportunity is for the next 5 or 10 years? So that's why I wanted to talk about demographics. Next one. Household diversity. And again, it depends on which market we're thinking about. But we are seeing more diversity, typically, in most mature and established wine markets. So again, I've just illustrated this with data from the US, where what we're seeing is the decline there, that red line, the one going down. So this is by ethnicity in the US. That red line is people identifying as white, ethnically white, whereas the line going up, the black dark line that goes up a little bit, or goes up the most, I should say, is Hispanic. So you can see that changing, and it's particularly the case in the US that actually the number of younger people in the US of Hispanic origin will outpace or be larger than of self-identifying as white origin. So there's a real change happening in the younger population. So there is more diversity happening in more countries around the world in population. So when we're thinking about, I'm targeting America, or this state in America, or the UK, or this part of Germany, increasingly those populations will be ethnically diverse. Not just the kind of what we might have in our mind's eye of the typical American in Idaho, or Londoner, or somebody from Frankfurt, because of this increasing global diversity that we're seeing. So it's thinking about how that might impact what you're doing in different markets. We also, and I think this is really interesting from a wine point of view, is, well, drinks overall, but particularly wine, we have, again, this is US data, but I've quoted UK data from the UK census at the bottom. In most countries, we are seeing an increase in one-person households, so one adult households. So part of that is us choosing to live alone. Part of it is because we're living longer. Our partners are no longer with us, but the other half is still with us. So that is happening. Higher divorce rates, separation rates in later life. Lots of drivers as to why we're seeing that. But in the UK and the US, it's around 30% now of households are single adult households. So if we have a think about what that impact might be on wine, does that mean that we need smaller serve formats? Could be. Does it mean that the people in single adult households might actually socialize more because they're, or have, so actually the idea of single serves is not necessarily relevant because of the way they're behaving or the way they're socializing. But it's thinking about what impact could this have on my wine business and what might I need to change today for tomorrow. Another kind of household diversity is the proportion of young adults still living in the family household is increasing, or parental household is increasing. Now you see those big blips during COVID. So you've got two age groups. So you've got the 18 to 24-year-olds at the top, and then the 25 to 34-year-olds here. And you've got men is green and women is purple. So what this tells us is this is in the US, American men aged in their 25 to 34 increasingly want to live at home with mum and dad. Wonder why that might be. I'm being facetious because actually a lot of it's about economic pressure. So the reality is being able to afford housing, and I could show you similar data. So what's really, from other countries, what's really interesting, you see the COVID blip, obviously, and when people move back home, not surprisingly. But what that leads to is that's multi-generational socializing and consumption. Because if you've got more multi-generational households, then typically you'll be socializing, drinking, eating, multi-generational. So the idea that that younger consumers will influence their parents, the generation up, and vice versa. So actually, you're not necessarily just communicating with purchases that go on in a household to that target person, but it might be to other adults of legal drinking age in that household. So if I think about what happens in our household now, when my now 21 and 25-year-old kids come home, particularly over COVID when they were both home, was, I started drinking different things because they were in the house and that's what they had, and vice versa. Because we were in the household together for a year, which we hadn't been when they'd both been adults, our consumption pattern, my personal consumption pattern, changed as a result of that. So again, that's one to think about. Social cause support. So there's a lot about social causes. Should brands, should companies have a view on social causes or positioning? How important really is it? Does your company talk about its positioning on social causes? Do your brands talk about it? Do you have a position or not? Not surprisingly, this is from the, State of US Consumer, so not specifically about alcohol or wine. Younger people care more that companies, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, should care more about social cause support. However, half of Gen Z are not driven by social cause support by products and brands and companies in the US. Or purpose, that's another way of saying it, brand purpose or company purpose. And actually, the majority of baby boomers and Gen X potentially get turned off by it. So I think it's very easy for us to say, my brand should have purpose, my company should have purpose. But actually, there can be a negative flip side to that. It doesn't always encourage, it can be reject. Consumers can reject brands as a result of it. There are also missteps as well. You know, the famous, yeah.
I would like to know what baby boomers means.
Baby boomers is typically people who are now starting kind of late 50s. So late 50s to early 70s is how old they are today. Yeah, so it's the different generations. Because Gen Z now go up to, sorry, that's a really good question. I should have said that at the beginning. Gen Z now go up to kind of 26, 27. It depends, the definitions, you know, there isn't a single definition. So millennials are typically kind of 29, 30 to mid 40s. And then mid 40s to late 50s. And then late 50s to early 70s, and then seniors is sort of early, mid-70s up. Did I go through that too quickly? Do you want me to go again? We're okay? Yeah. I can add it into the final version of the presentation. I can put a key in. Sorry, I should have done that. It's a really good question. Yes, so purpose is great, but purpose can also go really, really wrong. Spectacularly wrong, as it did in, I'm sure you're all familiar with what happened with Bud Light. Yeah, everybody very familiar with, no? Do you want me to tell you the story of when purpose goes wrong? Yes, okay. So, I'll try and do it quickly. Bud Light, the universal beer, AB InBev, universal beer of America, one of the largest volume beer, quite a standard kind of lower mid-market, you know, been there forever, everybody knows it, you know, sort of most people relatively kind of neutral, just grab a Bud Light, nothing more than that. Over time, gradual decline in market share, but from a really strong position with craft beer, with moderation, with spirits, with cocktails, with RTDs. They'd been the beer of kind of middle America. So it was, you know, kind of everyday, normal people, kind of average Joe beer. So, and their population of drinkers was aging. A bit like what I've just showed you, because the American population was aging. They brought in a new head of marketing, that's when marketing can go wrong, who said we need to diversify our reach, our communication. They invest loads, millions, billions of dollars in advertising because it's the #1 brand in America. We need to appeal not just to kind of average Joe in Milwaukee who's 58. We actually need to, or 63, we need to broaden to bring younger people into our beer. So they, amongst many things and lots of advertising, they did some very small kind of TikTok influencer videos with lots of different types of influencers in America. And what they did was they sent them cans of Bud Light with the influencer's name on, and the influencer would do like a 15-minute TikTok video just going, oh, Bud Light have sent me this can, isn't it great? Now I'm drinking it. You know, really, you'd say, was really not a big deal. However, one of the influencers they sent it to was a trans woman who was celebrating, on that occasion, a year of identifying as a woman. Quite well-known personality in the US. So she opens the can and goes, oh, I'm really happy to be celebrating living a year identifying as a woman. Isn't it great? Middle America didn't like this. And it became a massive political backlash. So country singers, sports people, people with quite strong views, started doing things like taking videos of themselves out in their backyard, shooting range, shooting cans of Bud, going, I'm never going to drink Bud again, because they supported a trans person. And it became this huge political minefield. Anyway, the result of which is that sales of Bud Light dropped by over 20% in a month. 20% of the biggest brand. Stock price, share price fell. You know, the CEO had to keep going out doing notifications to shareholders. It was absolute carnage. And the volume that they lost, the value that they lost in shareholder value for a huge company, because one trans TikTok influencer, amongst many, amongst loads of campaigns, amongst loads of advertising. They were doing Super Bowl advertising. But that didn't, it was the fact that it got caught up in the politics, in politics with a small p, social politics. And because there are, in the world, extreme views on trans community, that's what happened. So the idea that this lady who had taken over as marketing director 6 months earlier said, we need to diversify and include lots of people, I imagine as human beings, most people would go, yeah, that's a really good idea, because we want to include lots of people. We want to be inclusive. But social purpose or social cause support can be very dangerous also. So I'm not trying to say, the story is not to say don't do it. I'm not saying I don't advise it, but I'm just saying, you know, think about what really matters to you and your brands and your company. And if it's something you're willing to take a stance on, then brilliant. But getting caught up in something you're not willing to take a stance on can be really, really dangerous as well. The biggest beer brand in the US can get caught up in it, then that means any of us can. So this data is a few years old, so it was done just sort of in COVID, which is why key workers and healthcare workers was so important when we collected the data. But this is asking amongst regular wine drinkers. We're asking them, this is in the US, what by age group are you more or less influenced by businesses that do this? So this is amongst regular wine drinkers. And again, what you see, not surprisingly, is us lovely old people I'm not quite a boomer, I'm just I'll declare it in Gen X. So I'm not quite as miserable as all of the boomers out there, but you'll see that typically boomers, you know, this can be, it can be negative. If you're explicit about these social causes, for example, amongst regular wine drinkers, actually it can have a negative impact potentially on your core drinkers. So again, it's just about being aware. Knowing, you know, don't assume that supporting social causes is going to be positive to everybody. So that's my point about understanding data and understanding the impact of the decisions that you're making. Because with the exception of the fact that, you know, actively supporting the LGBTQ, I should put in there, plus community, actually may not, for the majority of consumers, unless this is something you really believe in and your brand is there to do this. But it may have an impact on your profitability and your bottom line.
Lulie?
Yeah.
I have it out on the first one.
Yeah, so this was done just at the time of COVID. So key workers would be, typically it's kind of like healthcare professionals or police or the kind of people that keep our countries functioning. And obviously during COVID, we were all more thoughtful, potentially, or more headspace to those types of people. So leading from purpose now to specifically environmental. So what we're looking at here is in a range of countries over time, the proportion of regular wine drinkers that have a high connection to sustainability in wine choices. So let me unpack that a little bit. So what we're talking about here is amongst regular wine drinkers, what proportion are strongly connecting to sustainability in wine. Make sense? Yep. And what you'll see is, one, it varies by country, how important or the level of connection with sustainable wine is amongst regular wine drinkers. Kind of averages globally at around 20%. You can see it varies in different markets. But you'll also note the dark blue line, which is the most 2023 data, actually it's not going up. So, although there is a level of importance or connection with sustainability for wine, it isn't significantly increasing within this time horizon. Now, that's not to say that as businesses, you might decide that actually being a sustainably functioning or performing business is really important. It's also not to say that core retailers around the world will demand sustainability in the products that they list. So that's huge, because you won't even get on the shelf if you're not meeting the sustainable criteria, particularly of the big retailers, which, as we know globally, is where a lot of the volume goes. However, if the reason you're focusing on sustainability is because you think that that's what will motivate consumers to buy your product versus another product, that might not be the case. Or it might not be as strong as you think it would be. There are other reasons to focus on sustainability, corporate ethics, you know, the way you want to be, the way you want to perform, customer demand. But from a consumer point of view, that's not going to necessarily be the big success driver. And if we look here, actually, so I'll explain this, so I probably shouldn't have put the slide up before I try and explain how it works. So this is from Wine Intelligence IWSR, something we've been doing for years. Around the world, so loads of different markets, we ask consumers, regular wine drinkers, have you heard of these things? Are you aware? Have you tried to buy them? So have you actively sought to purchase? So have you considered it? Have you sought to purchase? Have you purchased? Would you buy again? We take their answers to all of those questions and create what we call an index score. So the number itself doesn't have a meaning, it's just the level between them. And what we can do is we can then see which have the most opportunity. People are aware of them, they've bought them, but most importantly, they'd consider buying them in the future. We can look at it by market, or we can aggregate it globally. Within most markets, the pattern is pretty similar to this, relatively consistent between markets. And what do we see comes out number one? Natural wine. So you're probably sitting there thinking either, great, we make natural wine, or no, we should make more natural wine, or I hope what you're saying is, she's mad, not that many consumers can really want natural wine. I hope that's what you're saying to yourself, that you think I'm mad. Because, and I'll explain, when you say to consumers, Have you heard of natural wine? Have you bought natural wine? Have you consumed it? Would you like to buy it? What happens? Everybody goes, yeah, of course I'd buy natural wine because wine is natural. So we've got a really good advantage, positioning advantage in our category because consumers already think we are. So that's part of the reason that we're probably not seeing this level of demand for sustainable wine that we might expect because consumers already think we are. You know, literally everywhere I run focus groups, or I've run focus groups around the world, I tell you without a lie, if you ask consumers anywhere to describe a vineyard or to describe where wine comes from, and I know I've said this story before, so some of you have heard it, but it's because it's the truth. They always say, consumers always say to us, there are mountains, there are gently sloping vineyards that go up to the mountains. They've always got grapes, bunches of grapes, and full leaves on them, of course. A man, because it is always a man in their mind, goes along in a little tractor, and it's always red, normally they describe it as. He somehow, not quite sure how, gets the grapes off, and they go in the back of the tractor. They then get driven to a winery facility, they don't call it winery, to the shed where it gets tipped into barrels. Somehow something happens, and then you turn the tap on and fill bottles up. That is, in most consumers' minds, what wine is, where it comes from. So it's not surprising that consumers think wine is natural and are confusing it. So if you were really canny, you would be talking about the naturalness of your wine, regardless of how you make your wine, because there's no technical, no way you can say it's, naturally made. What's the definition? We know that that would be motivating to consumers. Followed by organic, and then, and so that's obviously because we're much more aware as consumers of organic produce and other categories of organic. And then two lovely terms, sustainably produced and environmentally friendly. What do they mean? Not a lot, but they kind of have a level of motivation for consumers. You'll also see that here, and if I showed you the data in a different way, you'd see that highlighting or primarily focusing on being vegan or vegetarian wine has a negative impact overall. For those for whom it's important, but for the majority for whom it's not important, it's negative. And that's because it's like, well, what are you doing to the wine to make it vegetarian or vegan? Because why wouldn't it be? It's only grapes. So it just brings confusion. Now, again, it's not to say on a back label talking about vegetarian or vegan can't be positive, and particularly for customer demand, particularly in the on-premise. But having that as the kind of big feature can be negative. What you're seeing here is the change versus 2022. This is from the current opportunity index, and then the change versus 2023. And what we see there is that those index scores have gone up a bit. So the green, there's lots of green there, which basically means that opportunity index score is getting greater, but the ranking order is pretty much staying the same. So if I summarize what that means, is it means that the opportunity for these alternative styles of wine is increasing a bit, and the order is sort of staying the same. So there is an opportunity for sustainability in wine, but I guess, again, I would implore you to think about why you're doing it, what the motivations are, and what the impact might be, which isn't always necessarily positive. Again, a lot of research we've done into organic. It overall, on average, shows well. But you also have a significant minority who reject organic wine because they say, well, is it going to taste as good or is it going to be a bit weird? Not my words, the words of consumers. So again, it's back to that slide. Remember the slide I said, don't forget this one. We are not our consumers, we never will be. So thinking that consumers will all go yippity-doo, they've got a sustainable or organic wine, therefore everybody's going to think this is better. Some people will, but some people won't. And it's knowing that and accounting for that in your business decisions. Right, next one, health and wellness. So you saw that column before, you saw this column before. This is the new one that you haven't seen yet. And what we're looking at there is the proportion of the total adult population amongst Gen Z who are abstaining. So that is our youngest cohort. So people of legal drinking age up to about 24 now. And what you'll see in every market, with the exception of the US and Canada, is that there are significantly more younger people abstaining than across the adult population. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. US and Australia, actually, it's about on parity with the overall population. So we can see that in most markets, we take Brazil, for example, as a good example, 21% of adults of legal drinking age in the US do not consume alcohol at all, abstain. Amongst the younger population in Brazil, that's nearly a third. In the US, around 30%, remember we had that number earlier, around 30% of adults in the US don't drink alcohol at all, mainly for religious or cultural religious reasons. But in our younger generation, actually it's almost the same, 29%. Same in Canada. We go to a market like Mexico, that's another really good example. 15% of adults in Mexico do not drink alcohol at all. That increases to nearly a quarter, 23% in Mexico of younger adults who don't drink alcohol. So you can see that this skews, this abstinence from alcohol does skew in most markets towards younger drinkers, but is not the same pattern everywhere. And what are people doing when they are choosing not to drink or to reduce the amount of alcohol consumption? Mainly, it's around, not surprisingly, soft drink, water, tea and coffee being more frequently a substitute for a previous alcoholic beverage. Then we get to no alcohol or low alcohol beer, wine and spirits, and no alcohol beer, wine and spirits. However, let me very much emphasize that particularly here in the no alcohol and also in the low alcohol, but not quite as much, in the no alcohol space, that is primarily no alcohol beer. Okay? It is not no alcohol spirits proportionally, volume-wise, or wine. No alcohol beer absolutely dominates the zero category. In the low category, beer also dominates hugely. So do not be under the illusion that there is a lot of, or, and I'm going to be controversial, potential for a lot of low or no alcohol wine. There will be some low and no alcohol wine consumed, But more likely, if consumers are actively switching out of alcohol, so moderating, they will be going to soft drinks, water, tea, coffee, or beer, way ahead of coming to wine. We know that because we can see it in the data, and we also know why are they choosing beer? Because they're not rejecting the flavor of no alcohol beer. They are rejecting typically the flavor of no alcohol wine or de-alcoholized or lower alcohol through intervention wine. The one very small exception in wine is sparkling wine. And that's because obviously we know from a technical point of view that carbonated is easier on the flavor profile when we're reducing alcohol levels. And also there is a specific occasion need for a zero alcohol sparkling, which is social and celebratory occasions where some people don't want to drink alcohol or reduce the alcohol they're drinking. So there's a very specific purpose for I want to celebrate with everybody else, I want a glass of bubbles, I just don't want alcohol, or I want to reduce my amount of alcohol. But there are really good alternatives available that consumers are more open-minded to from a utility point of view and from a taste point of view than no or low alcohol wine. Now, I hope, and I'm imagining some of you would put your hands up and say, but we're doing really well with, or I know, yeah, there will be a few brands or a few products that meet that very small need in the no and low wine space. Of course there will. But is it going to be the savior of a declining wine category from a volume point of view? Absolutely not. It's not going to make up for those 500 million cases that we're going to lose in the value end. And we're so dominated by beer, and the forecasts certainly indicate that beer will continue to dominate, particularly in the 0-0 space. It's interesting, actually, in Brazil, the highest growing category, according to IWSR, in 2023 was zero alcohol beer, out of all of the alcohol and zero, not low alcohol categories. Grew at 40% in Brazil, the zero alcohol beer category, way ahead of any other category in Brazil. Okay, the other thing just to throw in here is that when consumers, again, all the data shows that when consumers are reducing the amount of alcohol they want to drink, this is partly where RTDs and cocktails is coming in. Because by volume, they might be at 3, 4, 5 degrees of alcohol, ABV, as opposed to 15, 14, or 15 for wine. So again, that's a really easy way for us to kind of reduce our overall alcohol level if a serve is delivering those different alcohol ABVs. Social media consumption. So again, a bit of a myth. It's easy, it would be easy for any of us to think that we're getting all of our information through social media and digitally. This is a recent study done in the US, and it was around where, not wine specifically, where do participants discover new products in America? First one, searching the internet. Number one tip, how do you do in Google searches? Really, probably the best investment you can make in marketing. It's how are you doing in search engine optimization. Do that, if nothing else. Just do that. Put your money in your search engine optimization. TV ads, guess what? They're still out there and quite big, and they still work. Retail stores, so in-store information. All of that before social media. So again, I think it's quite easy for us to assume that that's the only way we now get information. Yes, it's important, but in country, you know, we're looking at America here, it's still really, other ways of learning about new products is still really important. And if we look at wine specifically, so this is how are people looking for recommendations, or how are they finding out about wine? And with the exception of Mexico, where family, friends, or colleague recommendation comes second, every other market, most people find out about wine from other people, not from digital sources or indeed other sources. So we find out about wine because our friends or family or colleagues tell us about it, serve it to us, order it when they're with us, share it with us. So it's about getting into those portfolios. I'm just grabbing this because I'm just checking myself on time. Yep, perfect. We're bang on time. Love it. Okay. So refreshment, and this is a big one. So if we look at, again, you'll know this, but just to remind us all, this is from OIV data. The red wine production globally peaked in 2004 and has been reducing. Red wine consumption is down in Europe, had been going up in the US, but has now leveled off. Global white wine production is on the rise from the lowest levels in 2002, and global white wine consumption overtook red wine in 2013. Now, I need to be really careful here. When OIV talk about white wine, they also include sparkling wine. So it's still and sparkling. So just, I know proportionally sparkling is still relatively smaller, but just in case you're thinking that doesn't quite make sense, it's because it's including sparkling, because that's how OIV count it. So you just kind of need to know that how they count it. So within sparkling, obviously dominated the recent growth by Prosecco, as we all know, and that's mainly being driven in US, Germany, and UK. Global, I'll try that one again. Global rosé wine production has increased by 25% since 2021. However, let's not forget that rosé is still only 8% of global total wine. So it's still relatively small. Even, do you remember that slide I showed you with the lovely uptick for premium rosé brands? So rosé, let's get it in perspective. It's still a relatively small proportion of overall wine. And consumption of rosé wine is concentrated globally in UK, Germany, US, and France. That's consumption, not production, obviously, where they're doing. So we are seeing this shift towards colder style, more refreshing beverages. And if we look at IWSR data, where I want to show you some spirits data here, which is when we're looking at, this is in the US, how do consumers consume these different categories, either neat or straight, so just like a poured measure, as is, mixed in a cocktail, or a kind of shot drink. So neat and straight and shot are unmixed. And what you see is that the vast majority, particularly in categories like rum, but even in categories like brandy and cognac, quite a significant proportion of the spirits are consumed in mixed drinks or cocktails rather than neat, short drinks. So a lot of it is longer, more refreshing drinks rather than sort of short shots or served neat across all different spirit categories. And then finally, I believe we're finally on the trends, if I remember correctly. Yes, we are. Blurring boundaries. And again, this is one we've been talking about for quite a long time at IWSR. What I mean by blurring boundaries is the cross-category, mixed drink, kind of moving beyond the kind of traditions of each and every ferment or distillation that we have had historically. So if we look on the right first, this was last year in the US. The CEO of Ribbley that owns Stella Rosa, which is one of the biggest volume brands in the US market. We just heard from Nielsen that our Stella Rose pineapple and chili wine became the #1 best-selling new SKU of the year in the US. And no, I haven't tried it. And no, I'm probably not going to try it. But that's because I'm in the weirdo left-hand side of that chart. We are not our consumers. I'm the weirdo because I think that sounds not very nice. But clearly, I'm not a real consumer because lots of them are buying it. So my opinion, whether I like it or not, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. So I'm irrelevant. All I'm relevant for is understanding what the data says. Doesn't matter if I like it. I think that sounds weird. I don't want it, but that's irrelevant. Quite like this one, though. This has just been released, so this is really clever. So this is a new release that's just been launched by Mirabeau. So one of these premium rosé brands. Okay, think about this. You are a premium brand. Think in your portfolios of your premium brands. And then think of the idea of, I tell you what, let's take our premium brand and let's do it as a premix with tonic water. Or with another type of drink. In this case, it's raspberry and orange blossom soda. Tell you what, let's take our best premium brand and mix it with raspberry and orange blossom soda. Put it in a bottle and sell it. That's a good idea. How many people in your business, if you had said, let's do that with a premium brand, gone, that sounds like a really good idea, I'll back you. No? No? Your premium is a premium brand. And they mixed it with Fever Tree. So they're so clever. They've co-branded this with Fever Tree. So you've got two brand assets working together. Two premium brands. Fever Tree is a premium brand. Two premium brands going, tell you what, we'll mix together. This sells for, I want to say, on their website, because I looked it up, because I don't know which, it's only literally just been released, so I'm not sure which markets it's in yet. 34 euros for 2 bottles. Most of it is soda. 34 euros for 2 bottles. The tax must be really low because the alcohol level is low. So, just a challenge. Take your, or can you imagine if you'd gone to your winemakers and said, you know what? Can you just add some chili and pineapple to our core volume wine brand for a new SKU? How receptive would your business have been to either of those ideas? So that's what I mean about change. When you remember that slide I showed you earlier about the kind of being brave and the kind of having change, which is in both of these cases, this is because it's what real people want, not what the leadership, the winemakers, the sales guys, the marketing people want. People who give us money to buy our products want. So in this kind of blurring boundaries, so this is, I'll explain, there's got 3 charts coming up which are really similar. I'm going to explain them. So what we do at IWSR is we look at what categories of drink are most associated with specific types of occasions. So when consumers are at occasions or thinking about occasions, what options are kind of in their portfolios? So if it's a medium or large-scale group event, the three categories that dominate are pre-mixed cocktails, tequila and mezcal, and sparkling wine. So most consumers are thinking or are using or drinking those categories at those types of occasions. When we move to small group relaxing or medium group socializing, you'll see that there are loads more categories that consumers are thinking about or choosing. Most of the spirits categories, including beer also and hard seltzer. So many more categories competing for small group relaxing and medium group socializing, although those two are the most frequent types of occasions at which we consume alcohol. So you've got like a more competition, but a much bigger piece of pie for those occasions.
Why wasn't in the questions or in the
It was in the question, but it only appears now, as if by magic, you've asked me exactly the right question, which was, well, where's wine? I showed you sparkling wine, and you were just going, oh, she didn't put wine in the question. We did put wine in the question, but most people only associate wine, still wine, with small group casual meal. So it's pigeonholed. Do you remember that quote from Robert Joseph that I talked about earlier, this kind of idea of a ghetto, wine sitting in a ghetto and keeping itself in that ghetto? That's what he was referring to. Which is that really we only see wine as being suitable typically for meal occasions, not for all of those other occasions where we're consuming alcohol. And partly it's because it's not seen as being as refreshing. If you remember that previous one I showed you with how people are drinking spirits and the proportion of neat or shots is declining, and you're getting increasingly people drinking it as a mixed drink. And again, it's about moderation as well, and alcohol consumption, as well as the wanting refreshment as a flavor. So one of the things you could do is you could, in your businesses, take a set of trends. So these are the ones I've identified that I think are the kind of key ones. You might have different ones you wanted to add in, or want to put some of those macro trends in I showed you. But what you can start to do is you can start to plot the power of the trend and the impact on wine, or you could change those axes, the relevance in our business, etc., to start to think about and prioritize which trends are going to be most impactful for you and your businesses. Because we can't do everything. We can't address everything. So how do we do it? So for my wine business, my vineyard I've got back in the UK, that's actually my one, which is what things do I think, how powerful are the trends in my market, which is the UK, because most wine made in the UK gets sold in the UK, and how impactful is that on wine produced in the UK? So that's the one for my business, which says that the must respond top right are refreshment, aging active population, and health and wellness focus. So those would be my priorities for my wine business. As it happens, what we are thinking about, we're only in year 3, is in my business, in my wine business, is actually about only producing rosé still rosé. A lot of it around club membership, locals and DTC with 55 plus age group. And also blending and mixing alternative rosé blended drinks. And also being able to keep our ABV down beyond, like 11 or 12%. So you can see how it's forming or informing our strategy, rather than me saying, well, what wine do I want to make? Or what wine can I make? Because I happen to have Pinot Noir vines. So I could actually make still wine, still red, or I could make sparkling. But actually what I'm thinking about is, well, what does the trends and the data tell me or that I should be doing to have business sustainability, because there are options that I've got. Okay, so we finished on trends, and moving to our final area, we're going to pick up on how to develop successful products and brands. Actually, we're going to focus, I should really maybe name that brands. We're going to focus primarily on brands and how you can develop successful brands to drive profitability to 2023. So let's just remind ourselves of market orientation. That nothing you're going to take away from this is not to understand what market orientation is and how it could be used in your business. So in a market-oriented business, we start with understanding our consumers. From that, we write our strategy. So it was a bit like the strategy I was telling you about my wine business and what our strategy might look like. Then I develop my tactics. So that's what's my brand, my product, my price, and my distribution. I do not start with what's my product and price point. Most wine businesses do. If so, you are not market oriented. It's like, here's what we've got to sell. I've made it. So understanding the target, making a strategy, and then saying, how do I deliver against that strategy? Finally, how do I communicate that? So again, a lot of businesses in marketing start with what social media campaign are we running this month? That comes last, not the first priority. It's the last bit in the equation. So, final quiz. And you'll notice on your printed sheets, which is a bit bad of me to have done, seeing as I'm in Chile, I managed to drink wine from Argentina twice, so ignore the second one. I wasn't making a political point. Please forgive me for that. There should be 9 questions. It was my error. So, how well do you know American drinkers? Gen Z American drinkers, exactly. So, yes or no? It's simple. I've made your scale even simpler this time. Yes or no? So go through, tick them, go through them. I'll read them out as you're doing it. I don't need to read them out, you can read them. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to just go through that. Okay, we're nearly there. I think a couple of people still. Looks like they're still doing. Okay. Right. How well do you know consumers, younger consumers in the US? I'm assuming for most people, you're thinking about the US market and you're thinking potentially about younger people in the US market. So, are Gen Z, so younger legal drinking age adults in the US, more likely than other age groups to drink craft beer? Hands up for yes. Most of you are wrong. So it's about what does the data say versus what do we think. Actually, the answer for craft beer is that Gen Z, 25% of them in the US of alcohol drinkers, drink craft beer, whereas for all other age groups, it's over 30%. So then you would say, well, why is that? I'd imagined that younger people would drink craft beer. Have a think about it. What do the youngest people, so in the US this is 21 to 24-year-olds, not have? Lots of money. What is craft beer? More expensive. Simple. So again, we've probably all made an assumption. Oh, well, it's young people. Of course they drink craft beer. That's what they do. Old people, no, that's not the case. Okay, number 2. More likely to drink wine with an informal meal in a pub, bar, or restaurant, or more frequently, I should say as well, probably in that one. Frequently is the word I'm after. I probably misworded that question. More frequently drink in an informal pub setting, etc. Yes or no? Yes? Okay, the answer is yes. Well done, those people. So, actually, twice as likely or twice as many occasions, younger people, so both Gen Z and millennials, will drink wine in pubs or casual meals in restaurants. Why? Because they go out to on-premise venues way more than older people. Simple. So when they're socializing, it tends to be done out of the home more rather than in-home. So why do we see them drinking wine proportionally out more often or more frequently than older people? Because they're out more often than older people. So again, it's thinking through those kind of nuances. Are Gen Z in the US more strongly influenced by grape variety, country of origin, and brand when choosing wine than other age groups? Yes? Hands up. Who thinks that brand and country? Yeah, we've got one vote at the back. Anybody else? Yeah, I think we're not so sure on this one. It's like, oh, I don't know whether to put my hand up or not. Is that because everybody else thinks no? Yeah, so put no's, put your hand up. Okay, fine, it's because you all think no. Okay, you're really clever because the answer is no. They are not more strongly influenced. Again, think about it logically. Younger people, newer to category, less experience, less time with the category. They know fewer brands, countries, and varietals than older drinkers, simply because they've been participating in the category a shorter amount of time, and you build up that kind of knowledge base over years. Next one, more likely than other age groups to drink wine from Argentina. Yes or yes? Do we think younger people are drinking? So some people that think yes, we're not quite sure. The answer is no. So in the US population, sorry, let me just bring my notebook up so I make sure I'm getting the numbers correct for you. 11% of the total US population consume wine from Argentina. This is the regular wine drinking population. Whereas 4% of Gen Z drink wine from Argentina. So the highest is Gen X and Boomers, who are 13%. What about from Chile? No? No? Okay, you're correct. The answer is no. Actually, the numbers are very similar. So again, 11% of regular wine drinkers in the US consume wine from Chile. 5% of Gen Z regular wine drinkers consume wine from Chile. And again, the highest is amongst Gen X and Boomers. Carmenere. More likely or less likely to drink Carmenere? So, yes? No, okay. Incorrect. So, the answer is yes. more likely to drink Carmenere. Gen Z are the highest demographic proportionally that consume Carmenere at 19%. That drops down to just 2% for boomers. How about Malbec? Yes, so that's different to Carmenere. He's saying very definitively at the beginning here. More likely to drink Malbec? No. 23% of US regular wine drinkers drink Malbec, whereas the lowest proportionally Malbec are 17% for Gen Z, highest amongst millennials at 26%. Okay, more positive to screw caps, younger people. So there's lots of yeses. I'm hearing lots of yeses. You are correct. It's over 51% positively open to screw caps amongst the Gen Z drinkers, but 39% overall amongst regular wine drinkers in the US open to screw caps. Least open comes from boomers. And then the final one, I'm actually going to do it in two parts. So more positive to red wine being described as sweet and juicy. Yes, absolutely. But sweet actually is the same. So it's equally liked by Gen Z, Millennial, and Gen X. So all three of those age cohorts at around 35%, around a third of all of them, are positively motivated by wines described as sweet, red wines described as sweet. For juicy, red wine described as juicy, actually it is Gen Z and millennials for whom that is significantly more motivating, around 30%, and that drops off to only 13% for boomers. So I'm imagining that you got some right and some wrong. What I've tried to illustrate is not only give you some free data to add to your lovely pool of secondary data, but to illustrate that it's really easy for us to make assumptions based on what we might think as opposed to facts. And then when we do hear the facts, like I've just said them to you, it's thinking, well, why might that be? Particularly if it's not what I was expecting. What might be driving that? How can I capitalize on those kinds of opportunity? So if we're thinking about developing brands for different types of consumers like this, what are they drinking? What should the product spec be? But also, what should the branding be? How do I not just develop the product, but how do I develop brands that are going to support my business to 2030? Again, something we all know, but reminding us, brands are two things. They're the physical attributes, and they're the perception in our consumer's memory. So they're shortcut identifiers. You know, we see the golden M Arches logo. We know what that means. It's that shortcut. Same with the Coca-Cola logo when I showed it. It was up earlier. Starbucks don't even have Starbucks written on their logo anymore. It's that shortcut identifier. But it's also a reference builder. So it's allowing us to understand and navigate really complex world. It shows us who it belongs to, what the quality of the product is. Branding, as we know, literally came from branding cattle to mark the owner. That cow belongs to me when everybody's cattle used to roam together. So it's about identifying the owner, but it's through symbol, and that's what a brand is. And it primarily works because of a very, I've really simplified it, but the way our brains work. which is System 1 and System 2, which I imagine most of you are familiar with, but let's just recap. System 1 is all the primitive, instinctive, effortless, fast, and most importantly, low energy thinking that we do, processing that we do. So that's where brands help, because they're a shortcut. We don't have to do lots of overthinking, it's just sort of instantaneous. Our bodies and brains try and make us do as much of our decision making and processing in System 1 as possible, because it's low energy, and our bodies are all about preserving energy in case we need it for flight or fight type situations. We're still programmed like that. System 2, or slow thinking, is the very conscious, calculating, reflective, reasoned, and hugely energy intensive. Hopefully, in 20 minutes or so when I finish, you will all feel really tired. I'm hoping you will, because it means you'll have been using loads of that. So not only are you listening to me and then translating, but you're also contextualizing what I'm saying, you're drawing out other memories or experiences, you're thinking about how does this fit to my business. You're doing all of those things at the same time. So you should be really tired because you've drawn, and hungry, because you'll have used loads of energy. However, what our bodies keep trying to do is make us do this, which is why brands work, because it shortcuts that decision-making process. However, if you think about what we tend to do in wine, historically, and a lot of wine businesses, we are asking our consumers to have to be in System 2 to have the privilege of participating in our category. You have to understand about how complex we are and how difficult it is, about the varieties, our vinification, and you, poor person, don't, you should understand this to be part of our world. So we're often asking people to be in System 2. And actually, System 1 is where our bodies and our brains want us to be most of the time. So the lovely pink Mirabeau Fever Tree blend, two things I recognize, looks pink, I'll buy it. Simple as that. We spend a lot of time in wine pushing people into system. Now, some people want to be in System 2 with wine. Enthusiasts love it. That's why they're, but we're talking about the majority, not the minority. So here's a classic example. What do you think is going on here? So relatively old data, but it illustrates the point. It happens to be in the UK. What varietals, white varietals, have you drunk in the past 6 months? Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Grigio, Chardonnay, we'd expect to see those top because they're proportional to the number of SKUs and the volume. Chenin, relatively big in the UK because we have quite a big South African category, which is quite Chenin dominated. Pinot Blanc, quarter of UK consumers say they've consumed Pinot Blanc. Not possible. Not possible. There is simply not that much Pinot Blanc sold in the UK. It's really, really quite rare. So what are they doing? They're seeing, even in a survey question, which is where this comes from, they're seeing two words they know, Pinot and Blanc, both of which they associate with wine. They're not lying deliberately to just be really annoying to our survey, but they're just saying, well, Pinot for Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio, Pinot Noir. Pinot is a word that English wine drinkers know because it is used quite a lot in different ways. And Blanc is something that they know from Chenin Blanc and Sauvignon Blanc. So these are two words that they know. So they think, oh yeah, that feels familiar, so I must have done it. because they're in System 1 when they're answering this question. So our memories don't actually work that well. So not only do people answer surveys incorrectly, but when they're seeing your brands, what are they actually, how are they processing them in reality, in their perception, excuse me, as opposed to facts and reality? Because actually, which matters most? So if we think about how important awareness then is when we're thinking about our brands, on average, amongst US regular wine drinkers, only half can recall more than 2 wine brands. Let's just replay that one. Only half of US regular wine drinkers can recall more than 2 wine brands, unprompted. So, tell me the names of brands. If we give them the brand logos and the brand names, not surprisingly, that increases hugely. But it's still, on average, in the US 14 and in the UK 15 brands, wine brands, that consumers can recall, prompted, with the logo shown to them and the name shown to them. You think, how many brands are out there? And that's how many they can recall. And why am I talking about awareness? And I'm going to talk you through this. So this is in the US. This is the key growth brand in the US. It's actually at a sort of mid-market premium price point. The brand that has grown hugely versus 2 of the kind of legacy top brands. And if we're looking at awareness, consideration, purchase, and affinity. So affinity is, it's a brand I like. And we ask, are you aware of? Would you consider buying it? Have you bought it? And do you like it? And what we see is the factor or the attribute that's changed the most as this brand has grown hugely in volume is awareness. So what has been the big change that has occurred when the brand has gone from not very big to very big? It's the proportion of people who are aware of the brand that has changed the most. Not more people liking it proportionally or anything else. And if you think about it, typically, and this is a sort of tough one because people don't tend to believe me on this, and I show them marketing science evidence, which is typically you get, if your brand, if 10 people know your brand, then 1 person might buy it. Let's have a hypothetical example. If 100 people know your brand, 10 people will buy it. If 1,000 people know your brand, 100 people will buy it. It's simple kind of mathematics almost. And typically when we look at any brands, whether it's in wine or indeed in any other category, that pattern tends to hold. And that's a much more dominant pattern than a change in consideration or affinity. That might change a bit, but what always changes the most when a brand grows, wine or other categories, is an increase in awareness. Simple awareness. More people need to know you. Simple as that. And if it were me and I was thinking about what I would be doing with my brands, everything I did would be around increasing awareness. Just getting more people to know me. Now, that increased awareness might be about more prominent position in more retailers. It might be about point of sale activity. It might be about just awareness driving through communication activity. It does, lots of different ways of doing it, but awareness, 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 awareness. I would not be focusing on explaining my position, no, just people simply aware of the brand. And that leads on to the big kind of last 10 years, really, in marketing science, areas we, marketing scientists today, have been focusing on, which is differentiation versus distinctiveness. And again, you may or may not be probably familiar with these two terms. Historically, differentiation is my product, my brand, is different from other brands because. So it's kind of uniqueness. And the older marketing science, or the way I was brought up in marketing, was, brands should all be focused on differentiation. I'm different to the others because. It's pretty hard in wine to be truly different. It's actually quite hard in most categories to be truly different. All of the evidence in the last 10 or 15 years or so has actually pointed to brand success or brand growth actually is driven more by distinctiveness. Distinctiveness is I look different and distinct to other brands. People can recognize me. Now, it doesn't mean I have to look completely opposite to everything in it, but I just need to look distinctive. I need to be recognizable as a brand. Doesn't matter, it's not saying you should be opposite or the same, I just need to be recognizable. That is the most important thing that we can do to drive brand success. So, according to the lovely Mark Ritson, who is my friend and guru in marketing, differentiation is ensuring that you're relatively different on things that matter to your consumers. No point differentiating yourself on something that your consumers don't care about. I'm going to make a sort of sweeping statement. I'm really different because I'm the only wine that positively contributes to butterfly populations. I don't know, I'm making stuff up. Grasshoppers. See, it doesn't matter. If that doesn't matter, it might matter, I'm making it up, but if that doesn't matter, then who cares? Enough to influence purchase decisions. So differentiation can be useful, but it's relative differentiation on stuff that actually matters. However, distinctiveness is all about making your brand easily identifiable by consumers, whilst ensuring that the brand looks like itself and comes to mind in buying situations. And historically, we've been really bad at distinctiveness in wine. Spirits and beer are really good at it. And that will be one of our problems moving forward. So here is just an example of how differentiated and to a certain extent distinctive on taste. So this is a subcategory, a country, and the three leading brands, it happens to be in the UK, but I could show you this for all sorts of things. You'll see that the three leading brands are kind of almost identical in the minds of regular wine drinkers. So this is amongst drinkers of each of these brands. And actually, they don't really see them, the three leading brands, as that different from each other. They're not really differentiated. Quite distinctive in terms of some of the, even the distinction is not really there. It does change, however, if we take a different subcategory and we're looking at the leading brands by volume. So those tend to be in the lower or mid prices versus premium price points in that same subcategory. So actually the differentiation is quite a lot, because you'll see those red lines being quite different in strong tradition and heritage and sustainable for more premium or higher price point brands. So there is differentiation between the price tiers, but actually not very much within the price tiers. And within distinction, you know, the kind of one of the champion brands globally is Guinness, who continue to grow and take market share, you know, after all of these years. And if you think about Guinness, you know, there's so many different things I could show you. Their distinctive brand asset is 3/4 black, 1/4 white in an image, kind of replicating the pint of Guinness, or so all, you know, everything that Guinness do is all about having that black and white proportion in everything they show. Doesn't even need to say Guinness. And they have a very clear, distinctive logo or brand asset in their harp. But that's what I mean by utilizing and having proper, distinctive brand assets that consumers can recognize, that you can just keep repeating, keep replaying, use every time. So what are some of the mistakes that typically wine businesses make when it comes to branding? Number one, believe that focusing on quality and origin leads to meaningful differentiation. We've got 95 points. We come from a really nice place. Our region is a really special region, because all of those things can kind of be said by most wine-producing regions around the world. This was actually, these two ads are actually taken from an academic study that was done of Wine Spectator, in Wine Spectator, where they analysed all of the ads, the adverts that had been placed in Wine Spectator or Wine Enthusiast, I can't remember now. So very US-centric, obviously, but a high proportion of the adverts looked like this, where you could literally substitute any two bottles almost, couldn't you? And I could switch those bottles over and none of us would notice the difference. And it's just this, you know, this is not distinctive, because it is effectively showing exactly the same thing. It's not going to lock into our system one in our brain enough that then that becomes automatic. The second biggest mistake that we tend to make is that in the marketing function, we think it's our job to change stuff. So particularly we go into a new job, we're like, what's your plan in marketing? Change everything. Change the packaging, change the logo, change the agency, change the campaign, then our brand will grow. I don't know, by then I'll have changed jobs. What we know is, again, a newer area of marketing science that's getting a lot of traction at the moment around advertising effectiveness, is increasingly showing that adverts, whether it's social media or TV historically, print, can run for up to 40 years before you start to get wear out. So we think we have to change our ad every year or every 2 years because we're bored of it, because we see it the whole time. Our consumers are not bored of it. I don't know whether you have it here, the Coca-Cola truck Christmas holiday ad. I don't know whether they air it here, where you've got the truck driving through the snow with the holidays are coming. I'm not going to sing it, but there's a song, the holidays are coming, and they've basically been running Coca-Cola, the ad, in various ways for 30 years. Now you think, why would Coca-Cola think about advertising, because everybody knows Coke. What's the point? And using the same advert effectively, or the same format of the advert. Maintaining awareness, not changing stuff. Again, the advertising science work increasingly is showing that more often it's more cost effective to keep the same ad, but in following years increase your spend on distribution of that ad rather than spending money on the creative of changing the ad. Consumers don't get bored of stuff nearly as much as we do when we see it because it's our job. So it's all about, if we believe that awareness and distinctive brand assets are the key for brand growth, then changing stuff doesn't make sense at all. Just keep it the same. If it's, if it's not broken, don't try and fix it. Third biggest mistake is about creating huge brand complexity. Brand hierarchy, multiple brands, hundreds of brands in some companies or organizations. This is brand power from a consumer point of view in the US. So which brands have the most power with consumers? Number 1, Barefoot. Number 2, Yellowtail. Number 3, Sutter Home. What is consistent about those 3 brands? They don't have lots of complex tiers of hierarchies of premium, ultra premium, premium plus within the brand. They simply have a number of SKUs, all of them, which are about flavor, effectively through varietal. So people can pick their favorite flavor, a bit like bubblegum, one could say. But it works because it's distinctive, recognizable, System 1, straightforward, not asking me to go into System 2. All of those things happening when you have brand simplicity as opposed to brand complexity. Coca-Cola, still, various flavors of the same thing, but effectively one product, one brand still. So those are the 3 kind of most common mistakes we make in wine branding. So again, if I leave you with nothing else on the branding side, the messages would be, make sure you've got distinctive brand assets. If you haven't, you might need to develop them. Once you've got them, don't mess with them. Keep repeating it. Keep repeating it. If you're going to talk about your differentiation, make sure it's something that's relevant and consumers care about, and make sure that it is really differentiated. And stop changing stuff just because you're bored of seeing it, bored of hearing it yourself. The most likely story is that your consumers are not bored of it because they haven't even noticed it before. So saying it again and again is fine. So just rounding up, this is the kind of checklist I use when working with businesses. Who are my target consumers and what do they value? So have I done my homework? Do I really know who they are? And when I'm thinking about what do they value, am I making it up like we just did am I guessing? Like we did in our Gen Z quiz, kind of having a guess based on my own experience and narrative? Or have you actually got data in front of you? Remember the primary, secondary, observational? There are ways you can get data. It's about just making that priority. What is my positioning and relative differentiation? Relative. What are my distinctive brand assets? If I took the name off or I kind of blurred it out, would people still be able to recognize that this is my brand? Or is it just, could it be interchangeable with anything else? And then finally, how am I building brand awareness? If I'm going to do nothing else, all of my activity should be about building awareness. How am I going to do that? How am I going to invest in that? What are the ways I can do that? So finishing off literally on the dot, it's almost like I planned it timing-wise. Few repeating some of the key messages that we've talked about earlier. So wine will continue to be consumed. It is not disappearing. But we will have reduced volumes, and particularly at the lower price points. That is a fact that we can choose to build towards and for, or just ignore and hope it goes away. We will continue to have a reduction in alcohol consumption with limited opportunity for no and low. Now, that's not to say that some brands or producers won't have an opportunity, but not all wine producers and all wine regions around the world are going to have an opportunity because the category simply won't be big enough. We will continue in wine with the less but better. So this idea of I'm drinking less frequently, and when I am, on a number of occasions, when I am drinking, I might be reducing my frequency. So when I do drink, I want something that makes me feel more special. Makes me feel more special. Notice I didn't say is a better quality wine. Those are very different. I feel better because I'm drinking this. Makes me feel good. Regular wine drinkers will become older. That is a demographic fact. And we will see proportional growth, remembering that the market overall will be in decline. But within what's left, the proportional growth will come from white, rosé, and sparkling, outpacing red in that proportional growth. And then finally, consistent and distinctive brands will take the market share. And there are those brands from all over the world that are competing for a smaller, in a piece of pie in a smaller pot. So the ones that will win are the ones that have consistent and distinctive, over and over again, brands and market share. So at 1:03, so I'm 3 minutes over. Whew, I think we've got there in terms of me delivering lots. I said I had lots to talk about because I was enthusiastic. Hopefully what this has done has helped you take time out from your, I know, inevitably busy days, lives, and careers to just reflect on some of the opportunities and trends that might lie ahead for you. Am I handing back to anybody for final words from amongst, or are we just finishing off here? We have a question, yeah.
I would like to go back to that Excel rosé you showed us.
Which one?
Not the one with the chili, the other one.
Ah, yes, yeah.
Yeah, you told us it's a big company that produces that, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any awareness of how, in terms of percentage, how much that sales represents?
No, because it's only just been launched.
And is it the same brand? Do they use the same brand?
I can't remember where the slide is, sorry. It was in trends, wasn't it? There.
Is it the same brand they use for the usual wine?
Yes. So Mirabeau, which is the brand, is the wine brand, is the premium rosé wine brand, and Fever Tree is the mixer brand that produced originally tonic, but much more diversified into others.
And if you were in that business model, how much do you think it will represent on your own sales? It's just a fashion for a small term.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. It's difficult to know what proportion of overall sales that will be, because it literally was launched a week ago, 2 weeks ago. If you're asking me to kind of guess, I'm imagining that this is actually going to be pretty successful volume-wise, because I think they've just hit the nail on the head in terms of the brand attributes. Any other questions? No. did you want to, yeah, shall I hand back to you just to oh, here's the microphone. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Lulie. Super interesting presentation. I think that we have a lot of things to think about. I love the part where you said that we need to put the consumer in the center to understand the insights, their needs, and then establish and develop our strategy. So I think that we are going to think in a different way from now on. Many of us are doing this, but think again. And thank you. You will have the presentation today. And if you have any further question, we can answer it later. Okay? Thank you. Thank you all.